Welcome to the final lecture of this semester. This week, we're going to learn about Albert Bandura and his social learning or social cognitive approach to personality. We'll end the lecture with a brief overview of the different factors that are known to influence personality. Let's start with Bandura's biography, and then we'll learn more about his approach. Albert Bandura was born in Canada in 1925, and he's still alive today as of the fall 2020 semester. He spent most of his life in the United States working at Stanford University. In the 1960s, he published his ideas about behavior and personality. Although he agreed with Skinner that reinforcement is important to learning, he challenged Skinner's idea that learning only occurs through direct reinforcement. Some behaviors, like swimming and driving, also involve observational learning and indirect reinforcement. His concept of reciprocal determinism suggested that behavior is determined by the reciprocal relationship between the individual and their environment. He was born to a family that valued education, and his parents encouraged him to go to school, to the only school in town, where he had to create his own curriculum. As an undergraduate, he attended the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada, and started studying psychology almost by accident. At the time, he carpooled with pre-med and graduate students whose classes were usually in the morning. Psychology classes were also in the morning, so he picked a psychology course because it fit with his schedule. He ended up really liking psychology, particularly experimental psychology, so he earned his PhD from the University of Iowa in 1952 and studied experimental psychology with some of the most influential psychologists at the time. The following year, after earning his PhD in 1953, he was hired by Stanford University, and he spent his entire career there until retiring in 2010. By the 1970s, he was very popular and was elected APA president in 1974. Throughout his life, he would publish a large number of articles and a few books. He earned many awards from the APA and other nonprofit organizations, and he earned 16 honorary degrees. Bandura's approach is an important contributor to the history of psychology, so let's learn a little bit more about it. His approach goes by several different names: social learning, social cognitive, and also observational learning. They all refer to the process of learning from other people, from watching their behaviors, more specifically, from observing the consequences of other people's behaviors, something he called vicarious reinforcement. In other words, we personally don't have to experience reinforcement or punishment for it to have an impact on us. On your first day of college, you learned how to behave in the classroom, probably from watching your classmates. If they opened their laptops and the professor smiled at them, you learned that having a laptop in class is acceptable. If they used their cell phones during class and the professor scolded them or frowned at them or made a comment about it, you learned through their behavior and the consequences of their behavior, you learned that cell phone usage is not appropriate for the classroom. Our perceptions of the situation and the characteristics of the situation can have an impact on what we pay attention to and therefore what we do. He also said we can learn behaviors without actually performing them ourselves. We do it by watching other people and then repeating, mimicking their behavior. He called this modeling, observing and participating. Maybe you watch a do-it-yourself video or a how-to video and perform the behavior correctly the first time you do it. In 1962, he and two of his colleagues demonstrated the power of models in their classic Bobo doll studies. A group of 72 preschool girls and boys were divided into several different groups. One of the experimental groups watched an adult kick, punch, and yell at the inflatable Bobo doll. The control group did not watch an adult interact with the doll. So one group saw an attack on Bobo, another group didn't see the doll at all, until the researchers left each individual child alone with the doll in a room. The kids in the experimental group, those who had watched a model of aggressive behavior, were twice as likely to mimic that aggressive behavior when left alone in the room than the control group. For decades, researchers have replicated these studies in a variety of situations with a variety of participants. Time and time again, they find support for modeling, for learning by observing and then mimicking. Click on the link if you'd like to watch a short clip from the studies, or you can take a look at some of the pictures that I have here. In the top row, you see a female model, she's one of the models, beating, kicking, punching the Bobo doll. In the bottom two rows, you see a boy and a girl, preschoolers, mimicking those behaviors. And in some cases, almost the exact same behaviors. You can see that both the little girl and the little boy sit on the Bobo doll in the same way that the model sits on the Bobo doll. Today, these studies are well known. You might even be familiar with them. But back then, this was our first evidence of observational learning, of modeling. Bandura and his colleagues also compared highly aggressive children with less aggressive, more inhibited children. They found that the children's behaviors often matched their parents' behaviors. The children who were highly aggressive also had parents who tended to be on the aggressive side. The more inhibited children had parents who were more inhibited. They also found that models can sometimes lead us to behave in ways that we wouldn't normally behave, that we would normally suppress or try to avoid. For instance, watching a flash mob, a group of people dance in unison in public, might make you want to join in, even if you don't know the dance. As you observe people's behavior, you watch them having fun, and you watch the audience clap, engage, smile, and join in. This phenomenon is called disinhibition, the weakening of normal constraints, inhibitions, through the observation of other people's behaviors. This concept has been used to explain group behavior, particularly the reason why some groups become violent. Bandura concluded that all kinds of behaviors, good, bad, normal, abnormal, are learned through imitation, through mimicking other people's behaviors. He openly criticized societies who provide the wrong models for their children, especially models of aggressive, violent behavior in video games, music, movies, and on TV. So even in the middle of the 1900s, Bandura drew attention to the number of examples of inappropriate behavior provided by media in the United States. So in Skinner's system, reinforcement controls behavior. In Bandura's system, it's the models, the people in our lives who have more control over how we respond, how we behave. Bandura and his colleagues identified 3 different factors that are known to impact modeling: the characteristics of the model, the person doing the behavior, the characteristics of the observer, you, the person who is learning through observational learning, and the consequences, the reward consequences of the behavior. All three of these things impact the degree to which we pay attention to the model, the degree to which we imitate the model, and the degree to which we perform that behavior correctly later on. The characteristics of a model influence our tendency to imitate them. We are more likely to pay attention to a model when there are a few things present, when they are like us, when they share the same age and the same sex, when they have high status, like a celebrity or an authority figure, when they display a behavior that is of interest to us, or a behavior that we know a lot about already. In infancy, babies tend to mimic adults' behavior immediately, in the moment. The adult often has to repeat that behavior a few times, show the child before the child will attempt the behavior on their own. At about age 2, children can remember behaviors they observed hours, days, weeks earlier, and can mimic behavior later on when they're alone, when they're with their friends, when they're doing something else. The characteristics of the observer also make a difference. Those who are high in self-esteem, high in self-confidence, are less likely to pay attention to models in the first place. People low in self-confidence, low in self-esteem, are more likely to mimic other people's behaviors. And finally, the reward consequences linked to a specific behavior can also affect the extent to which it is replicated by other people in the environment. Usually, greater rewards equals more modeling. Sometimes incentives can even override the characteristics of the observer and the characteristics of the model. A high status individual may normally be able to influence people to do something like drink more milk or register to vote. If the rewards of the behavior aren't meaningful to you, aren't valuable to you, then you probably won't mimic that behavior. And if you do, you probably won't continue mimicking that behavior. Plus, you're less likely to pay attention to that model in the future. All three of these things work together to influence observational learning. Bandura and his colleagues also identified 4 processes, 4 mechanisms that they thought guided the observational learning process. Attentional processes guide what we pay attention to. Modeling is more likely when attention is high, and attention is high when the observer's cognitive and perceptual skills are well developed, making it more difficult for children to pay attention to models, when the value of the behavior is high, and when the observer already knows something about the behavior. Retention processes guide what we remember about the behavior. We form an image of the behavior in our mind, and we use language to represent different aspects of the behavior. These 2 things help us remember the behavior, what it is we're supposed to be learning how to do. Production processes help us translate those representations of the behavior into the actual behavior. They help us produce the behavior. Practicing these specific physical movements and getting feedback about the accuracy of these movements helps us perform the behavior as we're supposed to. Incentive and motivational processes help us persist. Incentives are not required for observational learning to occur. We do not have to be rewarded, and we do not have to receive direct rewards from doing a behavior. Watching other people be rewarded or punished is often enough. So even though incentives are not required, it certainly does help. When rewards are present and we know they're present, we are more likely to imitate that behavior, follow the model. Sometimes other people give us rewards, sometimes we experience them vicariously, and sometimes we can reinforce ourselves. According to Bandura, we regulate our behavior, choosing what to do and what not to do, through a continuous process of self-reinforcement and self-punishment. We reward and punish ourselves based on our personal standards, which started to develop in childhood. We started to form these initial standards by watching our parents, our teachers. Their behaviors became part of our standards. Sometimes our parents did things that our teachers didn't do, and we learned that teachers have a different standard than our parents. Our parents can do things that our teachers cannot, like curse or discipline us. Our past behavior then becomes a reference point for us to evaluate our behaviors today, how we behave in the moment. Our past behaviors can also become an incentive for us to improve in the future. When we form these standards in childhood, some of those standards are realistic and some of those standards are not. When we fail to meet unrealistic expectations, it can lead to emotional punishment, saying bad things to yourself, saying hurtful things to yourself over and over again, as well as destructive behaviors, behaviors that can hurt ourselves as well as others. Bandura suggested that self-efficacy is crucial to human development. At every stage of life, our feelings of adequacy, efficiency, and competence help us get through the day, help us cope with life. People low in self-efficacy feel helpless and unable to control the events in their life. In many cases, they give up quickly and continue to doubt themselves, continue to doubt their abilities. People who are high in self-efficacy believe that they can deal effectively with life's challenges and they can overcome any challenge that comes their way. They persevere, they're less afraid of failure, and in many cases, they tend to perform well on the job and in school. So how do we make these judgments about ourselves? Bandura said we use 4 bits of information. 1, performance attainment. We look at prior success and prior failure. Prior success provides evidence of our competencies and therefore enhances self-efficacy. Prior failures decrease self-efficacy. Seeing other people perform successfully can increase our self-efficacy. Watching other people fail can decrease our self-efficacy. 3, verbal persuasion. Sometimes reminding other people or reminding ourselves that we really can do this if we work hard enough. Sometimes that reminder is enough to contribute to an increase in self-efficacy. And 4, physiological and emotional arousal. The more calm and composed we are, the more self-efficacy we tend to have in that moment. Based on the information we use to make judgments about our abilities, Bandura identified several strategies that we can use to enhance our own self-efficacy, but also that of others. Expose people to the experience of success by helping them reach attainable goals. Start small, start simple, and help them achieve success. When they experience it, it builds their confidence. It builds their belief in the idea that they can do this. Expose people to appropriate models who have successfully performed the behavior. Stellar role models are important for all of us: children, adults, employees, Fortune 500 CEOs. Everyone can benefit from watching other people perform the behavior as it should be performed. And then also observing the consequences, whether those people are rewarded, whether they're punished, what kinds of rewards, what kind of punishment. Remind people that they can do whatever it is they're trying to do. Again, sometimes this reminder is enough to help people move forward in that moment. I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. That story from childhood, the little engine who could, is an important lesson to teach children. This reminder can help us self-reinforce, self-regulate our behavior. His final suggestion is to help people remain calm in the situation, help them manage their physiological arousal through things like proper eating, proper sleep, proper exercise. Taking care of the body can actually help us take care of the mind. By remaining calm, we can think clearly and perform the action as we should. Bandura said self-efficacy develops gradually over time and throughout the lifespan, beginning in childhood all the way through life. He divided the development process, into 4 stages. In childhood, infants begin to develop self-efficacy as they explore their world and succeed in getting the things they want and having fun and learning. So they might try playing with a new toy. They learn that they can figure that toy out. They can have fun with that toy. Because they were able to do this on their own, they've built self-efficacy. They've built in their mind just a little bit more confidence about their ability to interact with the world. As they grow up, their parents become less of an influence, and their peers, siblings, teachers, coaches, and other people in their lives become more influential, become more likely to serve as a model of behavior. Teachers are unique in that they help children develop their competencies in the classroom. In adolescence, kids have to deal with all kinds of new demands, new pressures, and new decisions. They have to decide what they want to do with their lives, where they want to go to school, whether they want to date, where they want to work part-time after school. All of these things cause additional challenges for adolescents. Those who developed self-efficacy in childhood will be more likely to succeed in this stage and overcome those challenges. He divided adulthood into 2 stages, young adulthood and the middle years. In young adulthood, we are also adjusting to new life experiences, but these take on a whole new meaning as they're often tied to finances and other people, our family members. Things like marriage, starting a new career, starting a family, having children, adopting children. In the middle years, we reevaluate our lives, our careers, our family, our hobbies. This reevaluation can sometimes take a toll on our self-efficacy. In old age, after about the age of 60, Bandura said self-efficacy begins to decline for the rest of our lives. When it declines, physical and mental functioning can sometimes also decline. Bandura encouraged individuals in this stage of life to continue challenging themselves and learning new things to help maintain their perceptions of competence. Bandura presented a less extreme version of Skinner's behaviorism. He still focused on overt behaviors, but he also focused on cognitive variables and social factors. Because he favored experimental psychology, he relied on laboratory studies to develop an understanding of human behavior. He studied large groups of people and compared their performance using statistical analyses. He used several different techniques: observations, self-report inventories, and physiological measures. He did not use dream analysis, free association, or projective tests. Those methods that we talked about earlier in the semester were of no use to him. Bandura's ultimate goal with creating his theory was to figure out a way to modify or change behavior, especially those behaviors that our society deems inappropriate, undesirable. So he applied modeling techniques to help people deal with their fear and phobias. He used a technique called guided participation, where an observer watches a model do something that they're afraid to do and then participates in that behavior. Eventually, the observer is required to do the behavior on their own, but they are guided through the process by a model. With covert modeling, people are instructed to imagine interacting with the thing they fear or doing the behavior that gives them such great anxiety. Once they've spent some time imagining it and dealing with the physiological response, the heart rate, the sweating, the nerves, the butterflies in the stomach, once they've been able to master the physiological response, they can move on to guided participation, perhaps. Covert modeling has been used successfully to help people deal with their snake phobias, their spider phobias, and phobias of other objects. Covert modeling has been used successfully to help people deal with their snake phobias and their fear of public places. Behavior modification has been shown to be effective in a variety of different situations. It has helped people overcome their phobias. It has helped therapists treat obsessive compulsive disorder symptoms, and it has helped to treat some sexual dysfunctions. It's also been used to help people overcome their fear of needles, and it has helped students overcome their test anxiety. And there's even better news. The effects of behavior modification have been shown to last for years. This method can even be used in group settings to help save time and money. Modern researchers have studied all aspects of Bandura's approach, and they've found quite a bit of support for many of his ideas, especially when it comes to self-efficacy. Throughout our lives, throughout childhood, adolescence, and young adulthood, self-efficacy tends to increase. It peaks in the middle years and begins to decline in old age after about age 60. The research also suggests that self-efficacy is positively correlated with self-esteem. These two concepts are not the same. Self-esteem is a broader evaluation of the self, but they are related, which is good news. It means that self-efficacy is probably a thing. It really exists. We also have evidence that self-efficacy is positively related to grades, commitment to goals, job performance, health, pain tolerance, recovery time, how long it takes you to recover from illnesses, and parents' self-efficacy. If your parents have high self-efficacy, then chances are you also have high self-efficacy. It also works the same way with low self-efficacy. It might be then that we learn how to think about ourselves and our abilities from our parents. Modern researchers also suggest that self-efficacy is negatively related to things like drinking alcohol, smoking cigarettes, and experiencing depression, anxiety, and job stress. The more self-efficacy you have, the less likely you are to do some of these things, experience some of these things. Bandura's approach also inspired researchers to study aggression. Studies of aggressive behavior suggest that it is positively correlated with watching violent behavior on television and with playing violent video games. Both of these things in childhood and in adolescence, which means that if children play violent video games and watch violent movies during childhood, during adolescence, they are more likely to exhibit aggressive behaviors in adulthood. It doesn't mean they are destined to, it just means they are more likely to, statistically, more likely to be aggressive as adults. Studies of online aggression, of cyberbullying, suggest that those who are high in disinhibition are more likely to cyberbully, but that those who are high in self-efficacy are less likely to be bothered by cyberbullying. The first strength of Bandura's approach is that it aligned with psychology's focus on the experimental method. Cognition and behavior can be studied in the lab. Learning and modeling can also be studied this way. Second, observational learning and modeling are both practical. These techniques not only work, but they are extremely useful to a large number of people. You can use these techniques right now without training. For years, role models have been used to encourage specific behaviors. Some of you may remember the Got Milk ads from the 1990s and early 2000s. Nearly every single A-list celebrity can be seen on one of those milk ads, and they sold a lot of milk. Role models have also been used to address more serious matters, things like the treatment of women, the treatment of AIDS, and population control. Critics of Bandura's theory say that its focus on overt behaviors ignores the uniquely human aspects of behavior, things like emotions and motivation. And remember, Skinner's theory also suffered from this same criticism. Critics of behavior modification suggest it really only treats the symptom, not the cause. It addresses the behavior, but it doesn't address why the behavior occurred in the first place. The assumption is that that behavior was learned, but what if it wasn't? What if it's tied to emotions and motivation? Critics of this technique also say that it can be used to exploit, to manipulate people in some way. If individuals are, for instance, scared of a snake, scared of a spider, purposely making them think about a snake or a spider could be more damaging than helpful. Proponents of the approach counter that no one is ever forced to do anything that they don't want to do. Sometimes it's uncomfortable to confront our fears.